Today we go behind that power grab that wasn't, or what was it exactly? Well, right now we're going to try to answer all of the questions that we have about the revolt inside Russia. The mercenary who led what looked and sounded like a revolt is now trying to answer one of those questions. Why? CNN just obtained new audio of Prigozhin, and he says the march to Moscow was not a coup, but only a protest.
Two factors played into my decision to turn around. First factor, we wanted to avoid a Russian bloodshed. Second is, we marched in demonstration of a protest, not to overturn the power in the country. At this time, Alexander Lukashenko extended his hand and offered to find solutions for the further work of Wagner PMC in legal jurisdiction.
CNN is covering this story from all corners of the globe. We're going to start our coverage in London with CNN's Nick Robertson. Nick, a pretty remarkable response that we are hearing for the first time from the mercenary leader.
But it does also seem to comport with the big ongoing argument that Prigozhin had been having with the defense minister, Sergei Shoigu. What we learned from Prigozhin, not just that he's saying, I wasn't trying to overthrow Putin and we didn't mean or intend to go out and kill any Russian troops. They fired on us first, talking about the helicopters he now says he shot down. But he says this was a march for justice, he's called it. It was a march, he said, to try to keep his Wagner PMC, his Wagner mercenary group alive. He says in the audio recording that it was going to be forced to shut down on the 1st of July. That he had talked among the commanding officers and with the men, and barely any of them had agreed to down tools for Wagner and sign up for Russia's military, as was being demanded of them. And he wanted to keep Wagner alive. That this is what he's saying. And he goes on to say, when he was speaking to Lukashenko, and the reason he accepted the Belarusian president's offer to go and be in exile there was because Lukashenko offered him a way for a legal jurisdiction for PMC Wagner to keep his private military contracting company up and running. This has been about power and it's been about money. Prigozhin has been trying to fight off Russia's defense minister from taking control of Wagner, his men, and the financial income potentially that comes from it. But I think one other point comes through in this recording, and again, we don't know when it was made, but again, he takes a pot shot at Sergei Shoigu, the defense minister, saying that this march was a protest about the way the war was being run. This is a very destructive message for Putin to continue to hear made publicly.
Oh, wow, there is so much to unpack there. Thank you so much for that critical context. Nick, I want to go now to Nick Payton Walsh, who is in Kyiv, Ukraine's capital. So, Nick, how will Prigozhin's comments that this was a protest and not a coup, and what he specifically said that Nick was just reporting about the way that the war inside Russia is being prosecuted, how will that land where you are in Ukraine?
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of, I think, irrelevant to some degree to Ukrainians, so long as this remarkable revenge, tragedy, drama continues to play out. Yevgeny Prigozhin showing miscalculation, perhaps, or not telling us the entirety of the story, that he somehow thought he could take his troops, he says, hundreds of miles on the road up to Moscow and then suddenly change his mind and not have Russian President Vladimir Putin think that that might have been a challenge to the Kremlin head himself. He's so keen to point out this notion of it basically being a protest about how Wagner was being treated and the conduct of the war, rather than a challenge to Moscow itself. But this continues, as it seems does, Prigozhin's belief that he can keep Wagner as a group alive, possibly inside of Belarus. That's somewhat startling. It may never indeed happen, and we don't exactly know where Prigozhin is when he recorded this message. He doesn't spell that out. What does it mean for Ukrainian officials? Well, it certainly means that Wagner may continue to exist. It certainly means that the question of Wagner's functionality on the front lines hasn't been resolved, and that could mean further tension between Wagner fighters being asked to step down and the regular Russian military being asked to try and ensure that occurs. We've seen since this began suggestions that Ukraine is continuing to advance possibly at the normal pace of the past weeks in certain key areas, near the symbolic city of Bakhmut, where Wagner fought so hard over the winter, possibly in the south too, where they're claiming to take another village as well, and also another advance unexpected in the far west west over the front lines, near the Dnieper River, near the city of Kherson. So things changing, but I think really the central message from this is Prigozhin perhaps stepping down, not necessarily offering, I think, a full explanation as to his extraordinary change of heart on the road, definitely tallying with the Kremlin's message as of yesterday, but it is still a startling, I think, vacuum of power to some degree at the heart of the Russian government here. The defense minister releasing pre-recorded videos, Vladimir Putin releasing pre-recorded videos. The live respondent here is still Yevgeny Prigozhin, and that may be something the Kremlin have to answer in the days or hours ahead, just to reassure their own troops that there's somebody with their hand on the wheel. Putin likes to basically set his own agenda and appear when he feels like it, but these are very different circumstances. And yet again, we just seem to see a Russian elite here miscommunicating, misimagining exactly what they can get away with, reversing their chart of course exceptionally quickly. Prigozhin, Putin pardoning Prigozhin, startling series of affairs, and one that I'm sure Ukraine will hope will yield disarray on the front lines in the days or weeks ahead, Dana.
No question, and we are really trying to read the tea leaves on a lot of these statements that we're getting in the last hour from Prigozhin. Thank you so much for that. I want to go back to the United States and over to the Pentagon, where CNN's Natasha Bertrand is. So, Natasha, Wagner's mercenary leader we were just talking about, he says this wasn't a coup attempt, and specifically, what he said is that this was a quote-unquote protest, and what he's protesting is the idea that the Russian military was trying to dissolve this Wagner mercenary group and do so by July 1st. Do your sources there at the Pentagon, in the military, in American military, believe that that's the case?
Well, Dana, this actually does comport with U.S. officials' understanding broadly of what was motivating Prigozhin in the days leading up to this rebellion. As you'll recall, we did report over the weekend that U.S. intelligence did see signs that Prigozhin was plotting a potential major challenge to Russia's military leadership, and that was because of the fact that it appeared that Russia's military leadership was preparing to usurp Wagner and try to absorb it within Russia's military ranks. And so what Prigozhin is saying here essentially is that he did not want to overthrow the Russian government. Now, it is unclear to U.S. officials, including in the run-up to this rebellion, what his ultimate aim actually was. If he wanted to only challenge Russia's defense leaders and perhaps spark change in that area, or if he actually wanted to try to overthrow Vladimir Putin. As we saw over the weekend, he did march towards Moscow. And so that raised a lot of questions in U.S. official minds about what he was actually doing. U.S. intelligence officials were surprised, though, that this wasn't a bloodier affair. They believe that it is surprising that Russia's troops did not fight back harder. And that is one of the main questions that they're asking now, is why did Wagner troops face so little resistance from Russian troops? But just in terms broadly of what Prigozhin is saying here, U.S. officials are monitoring whether he is able to reconstitute himself, whether he is going to go into exile in Belarus, and just how Wagner forces are actually going to be absorbed within the Russian military after months and months of Prigozhin telling them that the Russian Ministry of Defense cannot be trusted and has essentially left them to die in Ukraine, Dana.
Yeah, or if they will at all, considering the fact that it looks like Prigozhin is suggesting in this audio recording that was just released that he wants to keep the Wagner group intact, but just keep them inside Belarus.